Welcome back, everyone. This week I decided to do a topic against theism, and I think I'm going to try to keep that schedule where one week I'll do something on an argument for theism, and another week I'll do an argument against theism, and if other topics happen to come up with particular themes, I'll try to sprinkle those in as well. But this is an argument or a problem that is often addressed to me that I always want to be hesitant and careful in approaching it because it does deserve compassion and deserves dignity in the response. And a lot of times I'm asked about this type of argument on my lives where it's going to be difficult to provide it with that. So I wanted to do this where I could have something to be able to provide to individuals that ask this question. And the argument today is going to be the argument from divine hiddenness. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's usually presented very informally. It's basically if God wants people to know him, then why is he so hard to find? And depending on the person you're speaking to, it's going to be very emotionally charged to very detracted, like the way that I said. But ultimately, the way that the argument works is it boils down to P1. God desires people to know and desires people to be in a relationship with him. P2, there are people that are not in a relationship with him. P3, God is omnipotent and omniscient, and thus would know how to have a relationship with these people. Conclusion, God either does not desire people to be in a relationship with him, or he does not exist. And there's a lot of different versions regarding this, ranging from God didn't answer my prayers, where was he when this bad thing happened? And all of these are very valid responses. I'm reminded of a story I read when I was a young child. This man had his son killed by a drunk driver. And enraged, he runs to the local church and demands of the priest, "Where was your God while my son lay choking on his blood?" And the priest responds, "Exactly where he was when his son was hanging on a cross." Now, that isn't going to be a comfort for most people, but what this is attempt to do is show that there is a misunderstanding, even amongst a lot of Christians, on what God desires. I actually spoke about this today in the OCIA class that I taught. But when I was growing up, there was a book called the St. Joseph's Baltimore Catechism, and the way the catechism was written, it wasn't in like a paragraph format like it is today, but it was written in a question answer format. And one of the questions was, why did God make you? And the answer was, so that way then I may know, love, and serve him in this life, so that I may be with him in the next. And it's that second half that is the most important. So, premise one, while it sounds accurate to the Christian position on the surface, it's actually missing a lot. It's not that God desires people to be in a relationship with him simpliciter. What he desires is for people to be with him in eternity, which is a lot different than being in a relationship with him here on earth. What good does it for an individual who knows God throughout their entire life, yet ultimately rejects him for eternity? So Premise one does not capture the actual position. It's that God desires people to be with him in eternity. And so, because of that, premise one doesn't fully capture it. Now, it could be restructured where God desires people to be with him for eternity. And so, then the question, with him for eternity. But then the question then becomes, how do we know, or how does one come to be in a relationship with him for eternity? And that leads into the first half of the answer that I gave of to know, love, and serve him in this life. But so then the person is going to respond, well, I want to know him and I want to love him and I want to serve him, and I've asked him to make himself reveal himself to me, and he hasn't. So therefore, the rest of the argument still follows, but not quite, because it then depends on what is meant to know, love, and serve God. And what people will present is what's often called an individual who is, oh, what was it? It's unresistant non-believer, which means that, hey, I am completely open. I am not going to fight back or push against God for as long, if he makes himself known to me, I'm not going to push back against it. I want to believe, but I see no reason to believe. But I think people overestimate their ability to overcome cognitive biases. Something that you discover and learn in philosophy is that everyone has biases that they are unaware of. For example, there are people who, because of their biases, hold to determinism, and there are others who reject determinism because of other biases. For those that are in a Discord group that I hang out in, the equivalent of this would be Michael Huemer's seemings. There are seemings that people hold to that there's doesn't seem to be a defeater that they can accept, but it's because of those unaware of biases. In the language of the Catholic Church, the terminology for this type of resistance that one is unaware of is called invincible ignorance. Now, this isn't to say that they know nothing about the Catholic Church, or that they know nothing about religion, or that they are stupid, or any of these other things that often come with the connotation of the term ignorant. What it means is that there is something that is preventing you from possessing the knowledge that you seek. Like a good example of this that someone pointed out to me was Jesus said, Father, forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do. But it is, he pointed out, the Romans were experts in crucifixion. They knew exactly what they were doing. But what it was is that they didn't understand the implications of what their particular action would bring about. So one can still have knowledge, yet still not know something. And so that's what the invincible ignorance is describing, is this state of being where you don't know through no fault of your own. There is something preventing you. I have spoken to several people who have admittedly told me that they'd be a lot more open to the truth of the Catholic faith if it wasn't for things like the sex abuse scandals, for things like their position on LGBTQ issues. So then the question is, how culpable are they for this resistance? It, for a lot of them, I don't think that they're culpable. Now, that's not my place to judge, so I necessarily I should probably say that I have the hope that they're not that culpable for it. But that is the type of thing that is being described for people who have this invincible ignorance. So the state of being in a situation where you are truly an unresistant non-believer is actually extremely, extremely hard to overcome. So as far as there are people that are not in a relationship with him, people will try to say, well, there are people who are an unresistant non-believer. But one, like I said, that's really hard to accomplish because of biases. So it might have seemed like this is the weaker version, but this is actually the stronger version of that premise. But in order for the God desires people to be with him for eternity, because that is the way that this premise should be stated. This doesn't necessarily follow, because just because you're not in a relationship with God on earth right now doesn't mean that that is going to be the final outcome for eternity. Just like being in a relationship with Him right now doesn't necessitate that you will be in a relationship with Him in eternity. So Jesus Himself says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will be with me in the kingdom. And something that, again, came from OCIA that I taught today, I love this passage regarding the separation of the sheep from the goats, when the sheep say, Lord, when did we serve you? When did we feed you? When did we clothe you? And the thing that always stood out to me is they didn't recognize Jesus. So not only is that for people like myself compelling us to see Jesus where it's hard to see him, but I believe it's also applicable to those who don't even know Jesus in the first place, yet still did these acts of charity. Anyways, because of that, they are still in that relationship, building that unity to be with him in the next life. But then that leads into premise 3. Okay, so what if, God desires people to be with him in the next life? Why would he make it still so hard here on this life? God is omnipotent and omniscient and know what would be needed, so that way then they could still choose him in the next and still have a relationship with him here on this earth. There was a paper that I read. I wouldn't recommend people going out because I don't think it was written as charitably as it could. But it did put forth a very interesting aspect where God knows what would happen if someone didn't have that invincible ignorance versus if they did. So, what do I mean by that? Let us say that there is an individual who, if they became Catholic, if they started following Christ and his teachings, yet because of their disposition, it would have eventually led to them rejecting the sacraments and rejecting the church to the point where they would have rejected God in eternity. Versus that same individual with those same dispensations now living outside of the church, now in a state of invincible ignorance. Now his culpability is lessened to the point where he now could enter heaven. Now, I'm not sure if I fully agree with it, because there's aspects of like the ability of grace to come in through the sacraments and things like that, but the fact of the matter remains. It could be the situation where there are individuals out there that are allowed to remain in a state of invincible ignorance because that is the way for them to achieve eternity with God in heaven. So because it's not our way, we like to think that God could do it our way, but our way isn't necessarily the best or perfect way. So in reality, premise 3 is working against the argument here, where God's omnipotent and omniscience can see that the invincible ignorance, and he's working with the invincible ignorance in a way that no human ever could to help lead the individual to him. That's why the formalization of this particular argument doesn't work. But that's not the reason why I always hesitate to talking about it. Because what do you do for the individual that is walking that road right now, that genuinely desires that relationship with God, and yet is experiencing silence? All I can say is that you're not alone. There are saints who talk about the dark night of the soul, where they know, believe, and love God, and yet they felt alone. They felt his absence, and they held on. And they're often praised because after they made it through the dark night of the soul, they refound that connection, and their connection with God was on a much deeper level than it was before. So this is what I would say to those who truly desire to seek a relationship with God, and yet are not experiencing his presence. Take that first step. I know many of you want to wait and take that step after God has made himself known to you. But reach out, talk to people, listen to the stories of believers. Reach out and find that community that can help you grow to understand it, because Christ came not to have one-on-one relationships with people. He came to establish a community that we call the church. And so this isn't meant to be a journey that you walk alone. So there are people out there who want to walk with you on this journey, so you are not going through this alone, that you're not experiencing this silence by yourself. And again, I know a lot of people are expecting me to come in and try to say, well, look at this argument, or no, like there is a spiritual aspect to the Catholic faith and the Catholic tradition. And part of that is this spiritual connection that no argument is ever going to create. So if you are genuinely in a state of unresistant non-belief, what's stopping you from going to a church on Sunday? What's stopping you from doing activities with a faith community? What is stopping you from surrounding yourself with believers and submersing yourself in that? And if you've never come to belief, you've just demonstrated how unresistant you truly are, and yet how unavailable God was. But true non-resistance should include you presenting and exposing yourself in this capacity. And I think many of you, upon hearing this, are going to recoil at this, and I don't know a better way to put it. Because what I'm asking and saying isn't easy. And it's like, it might be causing some of you to self-reflect and realize that maybe you aren't as unresistant as you first thought. To use myself as an example, while yes, I grew up Catholic and I lived the Catholic faith my entire life, I was never afraid of the truth. I was unresistant to the truth. And so anywhere that the truth could exist, I dove into it. The fact that I am in these communities of interfaith discourse and dialogue, and I listen to these people and I take what's true and what I'm convinced to be true and reject what isn't, I think shows that I am acting what I'm telling people to do. If you are truly unresistant, throw yourself wherever the truth may be. I consume so much content regarding scientific discoveries. I enjoy Kierkegaard, Vsauce back when he was still making a bunch of videos. Kyle Hill does a lot of stuff on um, nuclear sciences. I enjoy PBS Science, like the Veritasium. Like there's so many content creators out there regarding the scientific community that aren't even Christian, and I dive into it to consume it, to understand it, because I desire truth. I am unresistant to the truth. So, in summation for this conversation, and again, I am not trying to do this to be hostile or anything, but I do genuinely believe that one, not only is unresistant non-belief, I not only do I think that is an extremely hard state to actually be in, but if you truly are, dive yourself into it. And if it works, great, you're now getting what you said you wanted. And if it doesn't work, well, now you know. And the biggest thing as far as like the formalization of it, of the argument, removing the emotional aspect from it. Premise one is not that God desires to have a relationship with people. That is part of it. But he desires to have a relationship with people in eternity. And if that means that the person is temporarily not a member of the Catholic Church. As St. Augustine puts it, they reside in the camp of the enemy, yet still are citizens of the city of God. That's what God desires, is for people to be a citizen of the city of God, which occurs on the other side of this life. That is what God desires. So the argument, I believe, fails on two accounts. One, it focuses too much on the temporal realm and not on the eternal realm. If there's a version of this argument that focuses on the eternal realm and still shows that God doesn't exist, I'd love to see it. But every single formation of this argument has focused on this realm and God having a relationship with people on this realm. And then the second aspect of it is the existence of non-resistant non-belief. I'm not sure that actually exists, and if it does, it's really hard to accomplish. And if you do believe that you are one of those individuals, I welcome you to find your local church. It doesn't even need to be a Catholic church. But go to your local church. Find a place that you trust. And see what happens when you put yourself in a situation where God's grace is present. Once again, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm trying to do these off the script type of videos, and if you're enjoying it, please let me know. I'm not sure whether the ones with the script or without it are better. I'm also trying to have something up on the side of the screen so that way then people aren't just seeing me. But please, any thoughts, criticisms as far as the presentation of how I'm doing these videos, please let me know. And then, again, let me know what you would like to hear me talk about. What arguments would you like to hear me address? What problems or doctrines would you like me to dive into to help explain? I want to be a resource for people, and I want to create content that people want to see. And if I'm just sitting and talking about stuff that nobody wants to listen to, I don't want to do that. I love this subject, and there's so many things that I could talk about that I'm not going to get tired of talking about it. But I want to talk about something that people will want to listen to. And I can only do that if I hear from y'all. So please leave a comment. Tell me what your favorite argument for God is. Tell me what your least favorite argument for God is. Tell me what your favorite argument against God is, or your least favorite argument against God. Tell me what teaching you struggle with in understanding for the Catholic faith. Tell me what, let me know what you want me to talk about. But once again, thank you everyone for coming and listening, and I hope to see you all next time.